The first question that a lot of people have about these kinds of stories is, how did you find the story? How did you know where to look and what to do to get started?
So this story was born from another investigation that we had done. I was curious about lead after seeing the images of Flint, Michigan that paraded all around the media in 2016. And so I had asked Tampa schools what they were doing about lead in the schools, and we found that there was huge problems. And so we were writing stories about schools filled with lead, and a local confidential source in the health department who had grown up in Tampa reached out and said they wanted to meet, and they handed over a 160-some page report, one of those reports that never get read, but they just kind of exist. And it was on diseases that was happening throughout Florida. And there was 2 pages in that report that stood out. One, it was lead poisoning. The state had found that Tampa, the area, Hillsborough County, had more lead poisoning cases than anywhere in Florida. We never knew that. And then the other thing it said was that a battery recycler was a key contributor. It didn't name the battery recycler, but it said it was a key contributor. So now we're trying to piece together. Now I'm grabbing every bit of information I could find.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you realized pretty quickly that you had to learn the science. You weren't scientists, and you needed to figure out what was happening. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So when we began to knock on doors to try to find people who worked over at Gopher to get a sense of what was happening, workers began to start talking to us about blood lead levels and stuff. And it was like they were talking Greek or some language from outer space. Didn't really know what to make of it. So immediately we said, we got to learn the rules. We got to learn what's the lay of the land that governs this space. And as we reading these rules, Eli Murray, one of the partners on the team, said, why don't we get trained like the government gets trained to be lead inspectors? And so there are pockets that are certified, pockets of schools across the nation that the EPA certifies to give government this training. And we called them up and asked if we could take the class, take the course. They said yes. And so I flew up to Atlanta to take a class, and I'm sitting next to government regulators, people from Alabama and Tennessee and whatnot. We're all getting trained in lead. And then we had to pass an exam in order to get certified. I passed, some of the government folks didn't. And so then I had official certification to be a lead inspector, which now I knew the rules, but I also knew what equipment to buy. I knew what kind of tests to do. The rest of the team went up and they got certified. And that became invaluable as we were trying to figure out the story, but also we used those techniques to test and to sample to figure out what the lead was doing, not just inside the plant, but outside into the community.
And how bad was it? How much? And it wasn't just lead, right? It was other elements. Can you?
It was lead. It was cadmium and arsenic, which is cancer causing. There was a problem with sodium dioxide exposure at the plant. So there were workers, 20-year-olds, that were passing out and having to be carried off on stretchers because they had too much sodium dioxide exposure. There was carbon monoxide. There was a whole host of things. Lead was the most prevalent. And by the time we finished, and when I say finished, we grabbed, we grabbed about 100,000 records, and I had to look at all of it, the entire team, but 100,000 records. We interviewed well over 100 workers. We had about 65 experts, tons of emails, internal data that showed that about 8 out of 10 workers had so much lead in their bodies that they were susceptible to high blood pressure, kidney problems, cardiovascular problems. There were at least 15 workers that had fallen out with heart attacks or strokes. There have been some deaths. And we're talking heart attacks and strokes of strong, burly men, some in their 30s and 40s. And that process, we discovered that the federal government gave workers this unique right that most journalists and lawyers don't explore, where they can actually get access to the company's internal pollution testing. And so we had workers request this information. And so we could see workers getting hired healthy and then being overexposed to lead because the companies was testing them. And then we could see them getting sick and began to being hospitalized and having problems. In that pool of records, we also could see where the doctor that was hired by the plant was seeing all of these bad lab reports, circling them off, and then checking that there was no problems and sending the workers back into the plant, never telling them that they had kidney damage or any kind of problems. And so a lot of those workers never knew what was happening until we pieced it together and told them. And some of those conversations were really dramatic and sad to see the look on people's face when they found out that their problems, they were going to the hospital and having all kind of problems, but all the while they thought it was just them. And when they could see that the company knew and didn't warn them, didn't tell them, many of them got very, very angry. And a lot of them were heartbroken because there were some people who had died as a result of this.
So how did you get people to talk about these problems to you? How did you get people to trust you?
It was tough initially. Outside of Tomika here and her family, when we went to knock on those doors, these are people who had never seen a reporter before. And so I had a hard time getting people to believe initially that I wasn't the police. So I would go knock on the door and I'd be like, "Hey, this is Corey Johnson. I'm with the Tampa Bay Times." And they're like, "Man, if you don't get your FBI ass off around here." And I'm going, "I'm not the FBI. I'm a journalist. I'm with the Tampa Bay Times newspaper." And they'd be like, "Same difference." Right. And so that was a huge, huge struggle for many, many months. And what ended up happening that kind of broke the back of the story was families like Tomika gave us permission to share their records with some of the other workers. And so then I knocked back on the door and said, "Hey, look, let me just show you something. And then after that, you can kick me out." And then once I would show them, they would be interested and they let me in. And I just said, "Look, I am not here to hurt you. I'm trying to figure out what happened here at this plant. I'm not here to make you look bad. I'm not here to harm your family. I'm just trying to figure out what is happening here because I think something bad happened here." And over time, that trust got built up. And then people started to call other people to say, "Don't do the man like that. Let him in." Right. And that's how we were ultimately able to get there.
Tomika was one of the first people who you met. And at first you didn't open the door, right?
No, I didn't. Absolutely not, because I thought that he was Child Protective Services.
See?
So tell us about, you had been trying for a while to be heard.
Yes.
Doctors and officials, and you hadn't gotten anywhere. So tell us, what was that like when Corey knocked on the door after
the terror set in? And because the front door is glass, so I'm looking, and there are 3 individuals standing there. And I heard about the alleged removal of some of the other employees' children because of their high lead levels. And I knew that I had at least one child that had already been identified as having an elevated blood lead level. So when I saw them, I'm like, "Oh, wow, they're here and they're going to try and take my son." So I opened the door. And that's when Corey said that he was looking for my husband. And he wasn't there, so he's not here. That's when I asked, why are you here on the front step? Because I really wanted to know. And that's when Corey, Eli, and Rebecca pulled out their cards. And when I saw that they were journalists, I broke down and started crying. Because as they were handing me the cards, they were explaining that they were investigating some of the things that were going on at Gopher. And as soon as I heard that name of that company, I told them, after I had my moment, come inside. I've got to go upstairs. I have something to show you. I have been documenting and keeping medical records at home for not only myself, but for my son, as well as my youngest daughter. And we're not talking about a regular college folder where you would keep your paperwork. We're talking about 3-inch binders full of medical records. Reports about my son having double-digit blood lead levels. And at that point, that was 3 years ago? My son had he wasn't quite 6 yet. So he was still 5 at that time. Once I got with Corey, they came inside, we sat down and we poured over all of these binders. And I told him, if you need copies, take them. I know you'll bring them back, but you're going to be surprised at what you see.
Did you know that there was lead in the plant and that he was bringing it home?
No, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. You couldn't see it?
No. He did. The guys at the plant, they were given, if I'm not mistaken, 2 to 3 paid lunch breaks. They also were required to shower and change clothes before they went to break. And they were also required to shower before they came home. So you couldn't see anything at all. It's not as if he came in covered in dust. He looks like the person that's sitting next to you. You literally cannot see it because this is how meticulous these men were. They were trying to make sure that they kept their families safe. But what no one told them was that you can inhale it. Once it gets on your skin, it can absorb into your skin. And from what I have read in some medical journals, once it gets into your skin, once you inhale it, it can alter your DNA. And it can cause a multitude of issues or open the door for other issues to occur, like Corey said. High blood pressure, kidney disease, developmental delays, gastrointestinal issues, arthritis because of bone and joint issues. So you have a myriad of things that could possibly go wrong, including sexual dysfunction, infertility issues. The list I've learned is just, it goes on and on.
Can you talk a little bit about your son and your children and what kinds of problems that they have had?
Well, that's, again, something for the lawyers, but what I can tell you is that, yes, I have seen developmental delays. Yes, I have had to deal with gastrointestinal issues, not just me, but in my son. And I know that the Department of Health had been tracking him because they were able to contact me and let me know, hey, your son has this blood lead level. We've been monitoring it for a while. And then I never heard from them again. I could not believe that somebody was actually investigating this issue, because it was always something that we were told, it's just business. It's business. This is a job. You don't want to lose your job because you're constantly asking questions and you're trying to dig and you're trying to understand what's going on, not only with your body, but what's going on within your own household. Those are a lot of reasons why he kept getting the door slammed in his face.
Let's move from the workplace to the home front in Milwaukee's north side. Your team exposed an epidemic of electrical fires in rental properties, and you exposed a lack of accountability on the part of landlords and government officials, some of whom were landlords. How did you get onto this story?
Yeah, thank you. Like Corey, I was curious, like you mentioned earlier. We had seen, there was a particular fire that happened in 2013 where 3 children were killed. And a lot of the focus was on the mother and negligence and that sort of thing. And no focus was really on this particular apartment where she lived and what caused the fire, which was an electrical fire. And so I remember thinking that was 2013. It's a long time ago. But I remember thinking, hey, I'm curious about why aren't we paying attention to what started the fire? And so, but I had another project that I was working on and I couldn't do that at the time. But then I would watch other fires happen and people be killed and everybody's sort of acting like, well, it's just an accident and moving on and just viewing it as an accident. And so I wondered, is it actually an accident? And I would like to look at this and consider, are these things preventable? Are they predictable? And then when the fire happened in 2019 that took the life of Clarence's father, 2019, one of my colleagues was out there at the time at the fire and came back to the newsroom. And we thought, okay, we have to look at this now. This is just, it's gone on for long enough. Let's take a look. So finally in 2021, we started to investigate and try to answer the question, are these preventable and are they predictable? And so as we started digging, I was surprised to find that, number one, these fires are seldom investigated very well when they're suspected to be electrical. If there's no arson suspected or homicide or any crime, a lot of times the fire inspectors just leave it at, they think it's electrical, but they call it undetermined because they would need electrical mapping. They would need electrical engineers to come in and really nail it down. And they don't do that 75% of the time. They're considered undetermined. So therefore, there's no accountability to what started the fire.
What's going on? Why can they get away with it there more than in wealthy areas? Or why is this happening?
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we thought we saw. Anecdotally, we thought, okay, it seems like these are happening there. But my colleagues John Diedrich and Daphne Chen came into the project and really crunched the numbers to see what was going on. So it was not easy to do because the database that keeps the fire keeps track of the fire deaths and the actual fires themselves. It's a voluntary reporting system. So it's woefully inadequate. When we really tried to tally up what was going on, it was tough to do. So we had to get medical records from the coroner's office and local fire departments and build it all together. But when we did crunch the numbers, that is what we found, is that one particular zip code in Milwaukee, the 53206 zip code, one of the most distressed neighborhoods in our city, those fires were happening there at 5 times the rate of the rest of the city. So that stood out to us. I thought, what is going on there, right?
And I think in both of these stories, a common denominator is that these are pretty vulnerable people, right? I mean, people who might not complain because they're afraid of being evicted or
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a population of people in Milwaukee that have been evicted or maybe have a criminal record or have a hard time renting any other place. So believe it or not, I mean, they're paying outrageous amounts in rent to live in a place that is falling to pieces, that has sparking outlets, I mean, lights that are flickering, just really fire traps. And the landlords are able to get away with it. Sometimes the landlords are purchasing these buildings for literally $5,000 or $10,000 and then not doing anything to them and just renting them out to people that are unsuspecting. I think a lot of us think that when we rent a place, that somebody has inspected it and have deemed it to be safe to live. And that is just not true. It's not true in most of Wisconsin. The state legislature has made it really difficult to do inspections. And so while we think that's the stories that always sort of surprise me is when they go against the assumption of what we think is common sense safety, that everybody would be entitled to have a safe place to live. And it's just not true.
don't banks or insurance companies require inspections?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, yes, if you have a mortgage. But as I just mentioned, right, a lot of these landlords that are buying the places for $10,000 don't have a mortgage. So it's impossible to know about how many are actually insured because insurance records are not public. But we did a spot check of 25 rental properties in the 53206 zip code just to see who had mortgages. How many more? We just did a random sample. How many of these 25 properties have mortgages with the Register of Deeds office? So it doesn't mean that's the most likely chance that you would find a mortgage would be at the Register of Deeds office. And we found that 75% of those did not have a mortgage. So they weren't required to have insurance. Doesn't mean they don't have insurance, but they weren't required to. And then in the interviews that we did, the house where his father perished, that landlord did not have insurance. And in other interviews that I've done as well, found that insurance is not common in that neighborhood. We wanted to really figure out what the real risk is. So we know these fires are happening here, but what is the actual risk in the rest of the properties? And so we knocked on doors like Corey and his team did, and just asked people. We went out with this electrician at the door and just knocked on people's doors and said, "Hey, do you want? We'd love to check out your electrical system, look for fire hazards." And we were surprised at how many people opened their door to us. They were thankful that we were there. Once they understood what we were doing, there were many people expressed gratitude because, again, it's a neighborhood that gets overlooked very often. And so people let us in 15 homes. We were able to inspect 15. We had again a random sample of 50 properties that we wanted to see because we wanted it to be statistically valid. We didn't want to go pick the worst house on the block. We wanted to be able to say statistically how many we think what the percentage of problems are in the neighborhood. So of the 50 properties, we knocked on 50 doors and 15 let us in, which to me didn't sound like that much, but the statisticians tell us that that was pretty remarkable that we got 15 inside 15, and of those, 14 properties had electrical code violations, and some really serious. Some open panels that if you touched, the electrician said you would go shooting across the room, and there would be children around, and so just horrendous conditions.
And explain why the legislature doesn't require inspections, or why they were dialed back at one point.
Yeah, there was a pilot program, a limited program. It wasn't even a pilot. It was actually just a limited program in Milwaukee at one time around the college campuses that did do some inspections. And the state legislature passed some laws beginning in the early 2000s and all the way up until 2017, 2018 that just really gutted tenant protections and made it literally impossible to do inspections by capping the fees that the municipalities could charge to do these inspections. A number of the legislators were actually landlords, and so they had their own agenda, and a lot of times those legislators their constituents aren't in the city of Milwaukee, and they're not dealing with the same dilapidated housing that our city faces, and so. There was a lot of, we wrote about that. We wrote about that as it was happening, and they were just allowed to do it. They just passed those bills.
You also noted that in many cases, the residents get government assistance, and that goes right to the landlords, right? So essentially you have government funds paying for these properties.
Exactly. That was one of the other things we found sort of horrifying, because that's another area that you could say, with HUD housing, or other, if you have funding that you could put a contingency upon it. And in our research, we found there are other cities and states, across the country that have really robust inspection programs and don't find the same problems. They've been able to fix these things. So there are solutions out there. It takes a willingness.
I still don't understand, if you don't do an inspection, how do you know there was no crime? Maybe it wasn't homicide or...
Sure. Yeah.
But how do you know there wasn't a crime of negligence?
Yep. Yeah. Don't get me wrong on that. They definitely do inspect to a degree, and when they get down to the point where they can see that it started behind the wall, when they suspect it was started behind the wall, is when they say, okay, it looks like it's electrical. We're gonna call it suspected electrical and just leave it as undetermined, because they don't want to have to go to court to sit and prove it later. So they just leave it at that, and they don't have, like I said, the fire departments don't have electrical engineers to conclude that it was electrical.
Like the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Now, you had never seen this apartment that burned down, but you said that you've lived in a lot of apartments like that, these substandard apartments that aren't inspected or kept up. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the agony. It's really the agony, of not really having enough electricity, enough heat, We have ceilings leaking or whatnot. I believe it was just pure pain. When we come to slumlords, they don't care about property or people. They only care about paper. And that caused pain. Yeah, my mother was like, this isn't right. Like, our whole life we dealt with slumlords, and we want to put a pin in one, So my mother is very friends with the Pathways. So she went, talked to Padway, and we got things started.
Yeah. So, Justin, his mother came to your office. What was it about? I mean, I guess that's what happened, but they came to you. What was it about this case that made you think you could get results and convinced you to take it? Because there must be many cases you can't take.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, anybody that comes into our office, it's our obligation to really listen, to really explore, and to figure out if there is a claim here. And with respect to his father who passed away, you look at what's happening in Raquel's reporting and you see that this is so common. So we really felt an obligation to look into this. It didn't seem right. It didn't sit well. We knew that the landlord was Morocco Investments. And Morocco Investments is a company that is notorious for really having subhumane conditions as a renter. It's an absentee landlord. So when we looked into this, we did our research. We filed open records requests. We got Milwaukee Police Department reports. We got fire department reports. We looked at everything, and we saw that we felt like something was wrong here. And we felt like it was our obligation to figure out how to make it right. And that's how we got involved in the case.
I mean, another common denominator here on all of you, whether it's the journalists or the attorney, is that digging for facts, going through the paperwork and finding the evidence. And I think that's really an important element of this kind of, of investigative reporting, which distinguishes it from opinion reporting. And there's plenty of really good, smart, useful, intelligent, fact-based opinion reporting, where they go out opinion sections and editorials and op-eds and do actual reporting. But this is the bedrock of investigative reporting. And I assume that Raquel's reporting gave you guys a lot of ammunition.
We saw over 3,000 violations from 2016 to 2020 across this individual's properties. We also looked at this specific property, and we saw that there were electrical wiring violations within 2 years of this fire that required permits to be fixed, and we never saw any permits on file. So we knew when we took this case, and I also, to kind of back up, Morocco Investments has had hundreds of thousands of dollars in violations. And what they do is they just pay minimum fines, $20, $30, just to stay out of a warrant status with respect to the courts. And nothing's changing. So we knew we needed to do something differently. And what we decided we were going to do was we were going to do something called piercing the corporate veil. And what that means in legal terms is when people have an organization or an LLC, sometimes they can hide behind that organization and never be held personally liable. And what they'll do is they'll take amounts owed and they'll basically shift ownership through different companies and organizations. So we decided that we were going to go after the actual individual, Will Sherrard, to make sure that we could make a dent in this and actually get a result to make this stop and secure justice for Clarence and his family.
So we should say that you have won this case and you're waiting for the judgment, correct?
That is correct. So we received a default judgment in this case against not only Morocco Investments, but his other company, W.J. Sherrard Realty, and himself personally. And now we're at the point in the legal process where the court has determined the appropriate amount of damages. And in reality, there is no appropriate amount of damages. I mean, you can't give Clarence his father back. It's unfortunately the only mechanism we have in our legal process to try to hold somebody accountable, but it's simply insufficient. And the reality is, as Raquel's story really outlined, he's not the only landlord doing this type of thing. And there are other people every single day that are in jeopardy of these types of electrical fires. And there needs to be accountability.
I want to come back to Tampa for a moment. Sterlin is the man. Sterlin is as I said before, in environmental protection for the agency in Tampa. And he had been on top of this company that was spewing lead for a long time. And he had forced them to make changes and improvements, and they'd been fined $500,000. They'd been forced to upgrade, but it wasn't working.
The one thing about regulation that everybody understands is there's a cost. There's the resources that you have to put towards it. And with most regulations, there's the federal, there's the state, but there's also the local. And we're a local county regulatory agency. And we were actually created by our legislature because they wanted someone local to be able to go out and to protect and to ensure that the citizens of Hillsborough County were protected. We thought we were doing our job from the outside because we regulate the outside air, not the inside. That's OSHA. But we had been fining them. We had been trying to get them to lower the lead levels outside, and we thought we were doing a good job. But when Corey came to us and wanted the records, that transparency, that desire to be honest, and when we would have conversations all the time, on the record, off the record, and I would explain to him the regulatory scheme, that it was designed primarily for self-reporting for the majority of the people. It was not designed for recalcitrant people who would take information and hide it and move it. So even though we had been trying to get their lead levels down in the atmosphere for years, when Corey came to us and brought to us all this internal information, okay, we as an agency said, okay, it doesn't matter what we were doing before. This is new information, and we're going to go out there unbiased, to try to find out if it's valid or not. And what we found validated almost everything that he was reporting. And what it did is it made our agency, take a look. It caused the EPA and the state to change some of the things that we've been doing, not just regulating this particular company, but the industry as a whole, the secondary lead smelters. So when he provided that kind of information to us from the employees, it was information that we would have never gotten. Because when you walk into a plant, you're the regulator. Nobody wants to talk to you. You talk to the environmental professionals, the environmental health and safety director, those kinds of people. And even if you ask the question to an employee or a worker, they're not going to talk to you. But when Corey gave us all of this information in these documents that clearly showed that they had been disconnecting equipment, that they had been hiding the fact that their original design was poor based on their own consultants' reports, we had no choice but to go out and track it down and validate all of the complaints.
So a lot of people don't know the reporting process, right? So They think that reporting is gotcha, like you find something and then you rush it out and make everybody look bad and feel good about yourself. But in actuality, when you're doing investigative reporting, you find like alarming, damning, potentially inflammatory information. The proper process, particularly if it's going to impact on someone, is to go to that person and to let them know, hey, you don't have to talk to me, but I need to let you know this is A, B, C, and D. And we want you to have a full opportunity to explain, correct, contextualize, because we don't want to get this wrong, and I personally don't want to harm anybody, right? That's my own personal ethic, that I'm not here to harm anybody. So when I was going to Sterlin's agency to look at those records, and they would graciously allow me to look at the records, naturally, the reporter is like the skunk at the picnic. Everybody's kind of scurrying around, don't really want to be around. And so they were curious, like, so what is this about? And what is this? And what I said to you, that we're not exactly looking at your agency, but if we find something, I'll come to you first and let you know, right? And so when we did find something that touched your responsibilities, you and your deputy, you all allowed us to come in and sit down and talk about it. Now, there was a moment there, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, and I'll quicken up a bit because I know I'm long-winded. There was a moment where you all asked me, said, you can't say your sources, but what do the workers think about what we as the government is doing?
Right.
And do you remember what I said?
Yeah. You said they don't think anything is going to happen. And what we made sure, is that we wanted to be part of something happening. And that's why we fought as hard as we could. As a government agency, you're supposed to be unbiased. You don't have a prejudice. You don't have, preconceived notions. But once we found out all of those violations, we pushed it to the max. We got the highest penalty, $250,000 in the history of our agency. We changed the way we monitored. Even though the EPA has a program, we came up with the random monitoring so they wouldn't have a clue when the monitoring was going to take place. We even required them to take the information that sometimes was getting skewed or changed. I won't say the word, but we took out what is called the human interface and required them to develop a smart system where the computers will monitor their equipment and monitor the parameters and send the report directly to us before anybody has a chance to massage it or manipulate it.
So let's take our first question.
My question's for Corey, and you speak...
could you identify yourself?
I would love to. Thank you so much. My name is Jonah. My question's for Corey, and I'm wondering, you're speaking with a lot of authority about what the company and maybe higher up decision makers knew about all this, and I'm wondering how you proved that, or what you uncovered that gave you that level of confidence, because I imagine you're not just saying that because you're causing inferences.
Unfortunately, I can't whistle Dixie and make stuff up. I have to have the proof, and so we have well over 10,000 emails over a period of about 7 years showing the managers emailing corporate about the problems, them discussing the problems. We have internal meeting minutes where they discuss the problems with the vents and the high lead and whatnot, and they, talked about fixes they should make and then why they weren't going to make those fixes. We had every level of that plant, from the executive level all the way down, people talking to us and telling us stuff. And then we also had internal video. We had their surveillance video. We had video that the workers had taken that, they were just taking selfies. And a lot of times they were taking selfies, and in the background, there was OSHA violations happening that they were capturing. And so we literally had all the goods to show that not only were they violating the rules, but that they knew about it and decided not to do stuff. We wouldn't have known if we didn't get this level of cooperation and communication.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. Thank you so much for your reporting and for sharing. Really inspiring. I'm wondering if your reporting affected you mentally, and if so, how you dealt with that through these, long investigations where you're so ingrained, learning this terrible, terrible information and meeting people so affected by it.
Why don't you take?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, it is a very emotional job. A lot of times when we were writing about tragedy after tragedy, the fires that claimed the lives of his dad and his friend and the children from that original fire, covering that story, I was in tears for long periods of time, listening to the audio of the police interrogations of the mom right after the fire happened, those hours and hours of those interrogations, and when she learned that her children had died in that fire. Yes, it does take a toll, but, it's part of what we do, and we just, it's nothing compared to the tragedies that other people are going through at all. So when I think about it like that, it's manageable. And we talk to each other. We have support, with our colleagues. And so, and also, if we get to the point where we just can't do it anymore, so we're respectful. There are, as an editor, I also sometimes will talk to, when I'm assigning a story or asking somebody if they're interested in a story, when someone's covered sexual assault for a long time, they will speak up and say, I just can't do another sexual assault story right now, or a suicide story, or, so we are respectful to say, okay, absolutely can find someone else to do that. So we have to kind of know our limits. But I'm going to let Corey answer this too, because I know if you had some issues while you were reporting this whole thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Health issues. Yeah.
I went to 3 funerals, and one of the funerals was of a source that I was fond of because I met him. He was sick. He was dying. His body was just in horrible. He had been around the lead for 30 years, and he had cancers. He had all kind of problems. Had weeds at one point growing on his heart. I'd never seen that before, and he was depressed because he knew he was dying, and that's all he would talk about. And I was like, just hang in there, man. We got help now. And the day that we were going to do a follow-up interview with him, a storm came through Tampa, and so we had to postpone. And that night, he got killed in a car accident, and that did something to me for a while. So much so that when the story was over with, it took me months to try to. I was kind of in a funk, depression almost, where people were happy because we won the Pulitzer Prize and all, but I still couldn't feel it because I still was grieving for him, grieving for some of the other workers, some of the other families. And so it took a while to kind of do some self-care and some healing on my own. And so that's a very powerful question, because it does affect you when you get into these stories and you're interwoven into people's lives. It does impact on you.
And I would say there's a change in the whole media industry in recognizing some of these issues, the effect on journalists. For the longest time, it really wasn't okay for journalists to admit that they were affected by stories or war coverage or covering violence. And now to hear these 2 journalists talk about it is really an important and remarkable change. And there's resources now. There is an acknowledgement that journalists can have PTSD too. And there's a lot of trauma training and self-care training that goes on now that when I was coming up didn't exist.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Smith from Milwaukee, and thank you so much for this opportunity. First time at this venue, it's wonderful. I'm more familiar with EPA hazardous waste rules, and I know under those, if someone is violated knowingly, even as a corporate officer, they can be held personally liable, either, for as much as fines and jail time. Is that possible under the OSHA regs, or is that not possible to hold them personally liable?
OSHA regs don't have those powers. In fact, many of the OSHA workers, they complain about that bitterly, that a lot of their process ultimately ends up equivalating to a slap on the wrist. And they actually brag, like, man, they wish they had what the EPA had in order to try to bring compliance to companies. So to answer your question is no, OSHA does not have those powers.
Thank you. That explains a lot.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jess from Madison. I work at Epic, which is home in Madison, one of the largest healthcare software companies in the U.S. I don't speak as a representative of them. I'm just curious as someone who's a part of a big community who wants to improve healthcare outcomes for people, especially from vulnerable communities. Was there an attempt to investigate some kind of audit trail from the hospital systems or the healthcare providers involved for possible criminal negligence or oversight?
Oh, you asked me?
For whoever.
What we learned was that the hospitals and the doctors were pretty ill-equipped to understand what was happening. I actually went with a worker on a hospital visit, and a doctor's visit, and he had high lead. He had some physical problems that looked like it could be connected to his levels. And I sat while he explained it to the doctor, and the doctor went to the computer, looked up lead poisoning on Wikipedia, and then told him, according to this Wikipedia, you're okay. And it took all of me not to scream, right. And so I just kind of had to sit there and be calm. But that helped me to understand that the doctors they didn't get it. They didn't quite understand it.
Yes, and there was no audit trail.
Yeah. Another anecdote along those same lines, one of the workers who was pretty young, very fit, was overwhelmed by lead and his body locked up. So he had to be rushed to the hospital. He couldn't move this side of his body. So the hospital workers came in and they were trying to treat him. And then he says, I work at the Gopher Resource Plant. And he said all of them stopped, ran out the room, and then they came back with hazmat suits on, like in E.T. or Outbreak, where they have the little space. So they wouldn't touch him without these suits on, which suggested to me that at least they were aware of the problems. But then they told him, don't go back to that plant.
What's sad is that these stories we're highlighting tonight aren't unique. And I sometimes think the founding fathers just knew they were going to let us down, which is why they enshrined journalism in the First Amendment to deputize somebody to hold feet to the fire, right? And so I just wanted to first thank Corey and Raquel for the work you do. I know it's really hard. I know you don't have the resources. You really need to do it. And yet you've shown why it's so critically important to do it. But my question, first I want to thank Tomika and Clarence too for speaking to reporters, because there's not a lot of trust. And journalism sometimes forgets that it is also an institution. It is a thing of power. And it's hard often to bridge that gap. And so my question to the two of you is there, suggestions you have for how journalists can approach regular people living their lives, hoping they don't get approached by a journalist to talk about the worst day in their life? But is there something that these two brought to the table or did that helped build that trust?
Raquel, why don't you start?
I mean, I guess I think just being human. I think we have a reputation a lot of times as being aggressive, or like Corey was saying earlier, sort of got you, or jumping out from bushes trying to get you to talk to us. And, we're not that. That's not who we are. That's not what we do. There are people that do that. And I think that gives us a bad name. And I've been saying a lot, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. And so, but just understanding that we don't always have bad intentions, that even with our mistakes, don't discard us, because our democracy depends on this trust and this relationship. So I think it just is being human and listening to people and trying to understand their fears. Like, there's legitimate fears on why people don't want to talk to us. And so I want to hear you out. What is your worry? What are you concerned that we might do, or what? So I think just being human and listening to people, I think is
what I've been telling students, because I've just been noticing it, is that as beautiful as these smartphones are, I'm noticing that students, and particularly student reporters, will try to do all of their reporting through the smartphone with text messages and emails, and never see some like face to face, never meet someone face to face. And I tell them all the time, we got to stop that. I mean, I see colleagues who do it, who just report by email, and I'm saying, we have to stop that, because for many people, we're going to be their very first encounter with a journalist, and we may be the third estate. We may be the living embodiment of what the Constitution set up, and people aren't seeing it because all you're doing is sending an email, and then they look and they go, do I want to answer that or not? And then they give you their best face. Whereas if I can get in your face and you can get in mine, we can get to your true feelings, your true understanding, and we can connect as human beings. And I think that our power as journalists is to connect with human beings, to give the gift of listening to people. There are so many people, and I can go on and I'll shut up after this. There's so many people who have lived their lives and not been seen or heard. And one of the gifts that a reporter can do is just to say, I want to hear you without judgment. I just want to hear you. And when you do that, I think that brings us closer together as human beings. And then that ultimately can create the trust to have people come back to us to tell them about what's going on. Because at any given moment, as we're sitting here now, there are people out here who are suffering right now, and for various reasons will never, or will be very reluctant to come to a reporter to tell them about it. So to answer your question, I think we got to balance out the convenience that the smartphone gets us, but go back to the old ways of trying to get with people, going out, sitting in coffee shops, going out and just listening and making ourselves available to hear what people have to say.
I think that's a good note to end this on. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you.